Hey everyone, Lucas Court here, reporting to you for CanadianAwareness.org. Today we're in Brampton at the Region of Peel City Council, where a prominent lawyer by the name of Nader Hasan is presenting his legal opinions and possible further legal actions towards City Council about water fluoridation.
Good morning, Chair Kolb, honorable members of Council and City staff. My name is Lisa Ciancino, and I'm the Chair of the Concerned Residents of Peel to End Fluoridation. Since April 28, 2011, the Concerned Residents of Peel have made delegations to Regional Council and have articulated to you the urgent concerns related to the safety and lawfulness of the chemical additives used in our drinking water. For decades now, all levels of government, public health officials, dental associations, and many other organizations have unconditionally reassured Regional Council members, residents, that the community water fluoridation is both safe and effective. Over the past few years, we have continued to highlight the serious concerns related to the artificial fluoridation, water fluoridation, with respect to the many adverse health effects and risks, the mass medication of the entire region, the lack of informed consent, and the potential illegality of the region's fluoridation program, including the Clean Water Act 2006, which empowers communities to take action to prevent threats from becoming significant. During these past few years, a growing body of new scientific research has been published in leading peer-reviewed scientific and medical journals, which corroborate our position on these issues. We want to draw your attention to some major legal challenges that need to be addressed before the Council can legally continue the current fluoridation program. The public has the right to know and the right to get answers. Council has been alerted numerous times on the new legislation in the Ontario Safe Drinking Water Act 2002, Section 19, now includes a broader statutory standard of care for individuals who have oversight responsibilities for municipal drinking water systems that extend to our municipal councillors. We respectfully ask that you reopen the fluoridation issue and afford our lawyer your attention as he sets out for you some key legal arguments against fluoridation. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction, Lisa. Regional Chair Kolb, regional councillors. I'm here as legal counsel to Ms. Ciancino and her group, Concerned Residents of Peel to End Fluoridation. They've asked me to preview for this council some of the key legal arguments that we would bring were we to challenge the region's fluoridation program in court. The idea being that if we preview these legal arguments and show our hand, we could perhaps avoid a lengthy and costly legal fight in the courts. So today I want to address two main questions: what the potential legal arguments would be, and I also, in so doing, want to address the region's potential liability if we're successful on these legal arguments. And I do want to close as well with some suggestions or recommendations for the Council. There are essentially three legal arguments, three main headings under which we would proceed. The first is that the Ontario fluoridation program and the region's fluoridation program violates Section 7 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms because its harms are grossly disproportionate to its benefits. The second argument is that it violates an Ontario statute, the Safe Drinking Water Act, and the third argument is that it violates the Federal Food and Drugs Act. Now, I won't have the time to go into all of the minutiae of these arguments today, but I understand that you've been distributed a legal memorandum that was authored by myself and my office, as well as a supporting affidavit from a leading scientist based in the United States who has worked for the National Research Council, the U.S. National Research Council, in a couple of in-depth comprehensive studies on fluoridation programs. Let me begin with the first argument and sketch it out for you in the time I have here today, which is in many ways the most important argument because it's the one that touches most squarely on the health and safety of Peel residents. Under Canadian constitutional law, the government can't put people's health and safety at risk, particularly where the benefits from a government program or law or action are grossly disproportionate in relation to the potential harms. That's the principle of gross disproportionality, which is a principle of fundamental justice under Section 7 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And that's exactly what we seem to have with artificial water fluoridation. On one hand, the benefit or purported benefits of water fluoridation are marginal at best, if it exists at all. And on the other hand, the adverse effects are significant, potentially extremely significant. And that's the essence of grossly disproportionate government action. Let me deal with the first side of the ledger, the marginal benefits. The purpose of fluoridation program, of water fluoridation, has always been to reduce dental decay. And since the 1950s, it has been virtually gospel within dental communities that community fluoridation of drinking water is responsible for reducing tooth decay. This belief was once thought to be unassailable, despite the absence of solid peer-reviewed scientific literature on the subject. But the evidence available today makes it far from clear that water fluoridation is responsible for reduced tooth decay across communities. As reflected in the Dr. Thyssen affidavit, which you have, modern studies show that there are numerous other factors, including modern dental care, including better diets, and socioeconomic and hygienic factors that are likely more responsible for falls in tooth decay than water fluoridation. And part of the proof for that lies in the fact that many jurisdictions, including virtually all of Western Europe, are unfluoridated. Yet in these regions, we see falling tooth decay rates at virtually the same rate as what we have in fluoridated regions in North America. So the inescapable inference from these factors is that the cause of the fall in tooth decay is not due to water fluoridation, but due to these other factors: improved dental care since the 1950s, improved diets, and the availability of fluoridated toothpaste. Now, even those who support water fluoridation, dentists among them, will concede that fluoride works primarily topically, that is, by direct exposure to the tooth, and not by ingestion. In other words, to the extent that fluoride works, it does so via direct exposure to the tooth and not through exposure to the internal organs. The U.S. Centre for Disease Control and Prevention, an authority that the Ontario government and Health Canada rely on, they concede this point. So if the primary benefit of fluoride is through topical treatment on the teeth, that supports an argument that we should have fluoridated toothpaste. But it doesn't support the argument that we should ingest fluoride in our drinking water. So in other words, there may be a good argument for having fluoridated toothpaste, but if that's so, it doesn't explain why we need to ingest it. So that's one side of the ledger, the marginal benefit from fluoridating drinking water. And on the other side of the ledger, you have significant adverse health concerns. The most authoritative study done to date on this subject, on the toxicological effects of fluoride, was a comprehensive study done in 2006 by the U.S. National Research Council. That's a nonpartisan group of eminent scientists, which is funded largely by the U.S. government and Congress. Dr. Thyssen, whose affidavit you have, was a part of that study. And in her affidavit, she outlines a number of the findings of the NRC. Among the findings of adverse health effects was that fluoridated drinking water causes dental fluorosis. Generally, that's a cosmetic staining of the teeth, but when it's serious, it can cause structural damage to the teeth. Perhaps more alarming than that, fluoride in drinking water has the potential to cause musculoskeletal damage, including increased risk of bone fracture and arthritis. And this is very serious. And the NRC report said that even exposure at a fluoride rate of 0.08 milligrams per liter, which is within the allowable rate within Ontario, could lead to increased bone fractures. Thank you very much, Regional Chair.
Runs 10 minutes at a time.
Thank you very much, Regional Counsel. And I think I'm on track to finish. And again, I don't have time to go through these findings in detail, but they are in the materials before you. There has also been a number of studies that have suggested a correlation between fluoride exposure of children and lower IQ rates. Many of those studies come from outside of North America, but a recent Harvard study, which is cited in the memo, identified this area as an area of significant concern. And perhaps most alarmingly of all, the NRC committee unanimously concluded that fluoride appears to have the potential to initiate or promote cancers. And that finding was corroborated by another 2006 study from the Harvard Dental School, which found an association between bone cancer in young boys and childhood exposure to fluoridated drinking water. So, this information wasn't around in the 1950s and 60s when most fluoridation programs were adopted across North America. But this information is available now. You can't justify, under our laws, putting people's health at risk by relying on dogma from the 1950s, particularly when that dogma has been supplanted by scientific evidence and medical evidence available today. If we can prove in court, and I think the existing scientific and medical literature suggests we can, that fluoride and fluoridated drinking water causes these harms, then a court would be obliged to conclude that Peel's fluoridation program violates Section 7 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and that in turn could make the region liable to Peel residents in tort for exposure to the risk of harm caused by water fluoridation. Now, let me move very briefly on to some of the other arguments that don't rely on a constitutional argument but are based in statute. Water fluoridation arguably also violates the Ontario Safe Drinking Water Act and the Federal Food and Drugs Act. My understanding is that the method that Peel uses to fluoridate its water is with a compound known as hexafluorosilicic acid. Now that is a product which is generated as a byproduct, which is a euphemism for waste product, in the fertilizer manufacturing process. And this is troubling because there are no known toxicological studies on the safety of using hexafluorosilicic acid to fluoridate drinking water. And this compound contains a number of other chemicals and contaminants, including lead and chromium and even arsenic. Now, defenders of using this compound to fluoridate drinking water say, hey, by the time it's put into the drinking water, it's diluted so much that it's not going to be a huge health risk. That's small comfort for people. I think most Peel residents would be shocked to hear that the region was knowingly adding a compound that contained arsenic to the drinking water. Arsenic, of course, is a known carcinogen. The United States EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, sets the ideal goal for arsenic in drinking water at 0 because it is a known carcinogen. And in my respectful submission, it's not just bad policy to use a compound with contaminants like arsenic in the drinking water, it's also arguably illegal. Section 20 of the Safe Drinking Water Act provides that no person shall cause or permit anything to enter a drinking water system if it could result in a drinking water health hazard. Similarly, under the Food and Drugs Act, the federal legislation, no person shall sell an article or food, and that food is defined to include drink that has in it any poisonous or harmful substance. Now, the common refrain that I have heard is that the Fluoridation Act of Ontario permits municipalities to fluoridate the city water supply. Well, in response to that, number one, that doesn't get you around the constitutional argument that I've laid out earlier today, because the Constitution is supreme law in Canada and trumps any statutory law. Secondly, although the Fluoridation Act permits provinces, the province of Ontario, it permits regions and municipalities to fluoridate, it doesn't say you can fluoridate by any means necessary. And it doesn't say expressly that you can use hexafluorosilicic acid. The city still has an obligation to ensure that its methods of fluoridating are safe and effective. And that brings me very briefly, Regional Chair Kolb, if you'll permit me 2 more minutes, to deal with the question of liability. If we are right in our legal arguments, then the city is liable to the residents of Peel, both under the Municipal Act of Ontario, which you're all familiar with, and the Safe Drinking Water Act of Ontario, which was amended to strengthen it in the face of the Walkerton scandal. The Safe Drinking Water Act puts responsibility for ensuring safe drinking water squarely on the municipalities, which means you can't pass the buck. It also makes those who make decisions about drinking water, including councillors, personally liable for the drinking water systems in their municipalities. So not only is the region responsible and liable to the residents of Peel, councillors individually are potentially liable under this statute. So in closing, Regional Chair, you don't have to take what I say at face value. There's a lot of science, there's a lot of medicine, but you ought to at least examine it. And you ought to hear experts, not just from the field of dentistry, but from the fields of toxicology, from the fields of epidemiology, from the fields of medicine. And you ought to hear from experts on both sides. And when experts do come before you to talk about this, you should insist on seeing the underlying science and the underlying evidence. Because what we've found is that the statements from authorities who are defending fluoridation programs, they seem to proceed along the following lines. Trust us, we know better than you. But they don't seem to be backing up their positions with hard science, with hard medicine, with peer-reviewed studies and reports. And if fluoridation were challenged in a court of law, the court would insist on hard evidence, hard studies, hard facts. That's what a court would require, and respectfully, councillors, you should demand no less. If you're going to continue on this path of fluoridating, you should at least know the science that you're relying on, because ultimately it will be you who will be held accountable to the residents of this region. Those are my submissions, and I'm happy to answer any questions if any have arisen.
There we have it, folks. Now, this will be a long process, but I can assure you, Canadian Awareness will stick to it till the very end. Thank you very much for supporting us, and take care.